All right, let's jump right in. Today we are taking a deep dive into Buddhist teachings, and specifically we're looking at this fascinating collection of excerpts you've shared. Seems like we're on a mission to unpack the philosophy at the heart of it all more than the religious aspects, right?
Absolutely. We're going beyond the rituals and the surface level and really getting into those core ideas, the heart of Buddhist thought, that have resonated with thinkers for, well, centuries, really.
It's true, and that's what's so exciting about this deep dive. So one of the first things that really jumped out at me, I have to admit, was how often Buddhism gets kind of, I don't know, lumped in with this idea of it being a religion centered around a god. Like you think of temples, chanting, maybe a deity overseeing it all. But then I really dug into chapter 23, and wow, it kind of flipped my perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's really fascinating is that the Buddha actually directly addresses this whole misconception. Like, he doesn't shy away from this idea of a creator deity.
Yeah.
He actually, like, confronts it head on.
Totally. I mean, that line where he says, I count your Brahma, one the unjust among, who made a world in which to shelter wrong. I mean, talk about a bold statement. That really struck me. But for me, I think what really drove it home was that story in the same chapter, the one with the being who sort of pops into existence first and just assumes, well, hey, I must be the big creator because there's no one else around.
Oh, right, right. It's such a clever way to illustrate how our perspective, which is often so limited, and the fact that our existence is really just temporary, like those two things really shape how we understand the world.
Mhm.
And I think what the Buddha is doing there is challenging us to kind of look beyond those limitations, to question those assumptions instead of just blindly accepting them,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's like that moment when you realize, oh, wait, the world doesn't actually revolve around me. It's both humbling and eye-opening at the same time. But okay, so if there's no creator, like pulling the strings, how does Buddhism explain this whole cycle of life and death, especially this concept of rebirth, like I find so intriguing?
Okay, so rebirth. Yeah, that's where things get really intriguing. See, rebirth in Buddhism isn't about like your soul, transferring into a new body, like you're switching outfits or something. It's more about the energy of your actions, what's called karma. Basically, it's this idea that the energy of your actions continues and influences the next experience of existence.
Okay, so it's not like me, as in like Matt, with all my memories and quirks, coming back as, say, a particularly insightful goldfish.
Precisely. It's not about a static self-transfer. It's more like imagine ripples on a pond. Your actions create these ripples, and those ripples, they continue outward, right? They impact the overall flow, even if the original source of the ripple is gone.
Okay, so it's less like a cosmic lottery and a bit more, well, understandable, I guess you could say. But hold on, chapter 24, it throws a bit of a curveball with all these stories of people remembering their past lives. We've got the Buddha himself talking about his past experiences, and then there are all these stories of children spontaneously describing events or people they couldn't possibly know about. And then there's that whole thing about Pythagoras remembering a shield from a past life.
Right, and that's what makes this whole area so compelling. It's like throughout history, these accounts, these stories, especially the ones from children, they've made people stop and wonder, what if there is more to consciousness than we currently understand? Like, it challenges us to really reconsider our ideas about self, about continuity, even about the nature of existence itself.
It really makes you think twice. So, okay, if it's this karma, this energy of our actions that carries on, is it as simple as like good actions equal a good rebirth and bad actions, well, you end up in some sort of cosmic timeout?
It's tempting to see it as this cosmic balance sheet, right? Like,
Hmm.
good deeds in, good karma out. But it's actually a lot more nuanced than that. Karma is really about cause and effect, but it's within this ever-changing flow of existence. So each action, and this is important, regardless of our intention, sets a chain of consequences in motion. Think back to chapter 29, that story of the man who steals mangoes.
Ooh, yeah, that's one that always kind of felt like a pivotal example to me.
Right, because it shows how those actions have consequences that sort of like reverberate outward, even without this idea of a permanent, unchanging soul.
It makes you wonder, like, if we aren't static, if we aren't these fixed beings, how much more weight do our actions carry? Not just for ourselves, but for everything around us, too. It's a pretty powerful thought.
It really is. It's like this shift, right? Moving away from this egocentric view to realizing, wow, we're really interwoven with everything around us.
Yeah.
Like every action, it sends out this ripple, and those ripples, well, they just keep going.
It is humbling and kind of awe-inspiring at the same time,
Yeah.
Like realizing the impact of even the smallest choices, you know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
But this leads me to something I've been pondering. We've explored this idea of no creator God, right? And we've
Oh,
talked about this intricate dance of karma and rebirth, but where does it all lead? What's the goal, the point of this whole journey according to Buddhism?
that's a great question. I mean, let's think about this for a second. Deep down, don't we all just want peace? Like a real, lasting freedom from all the anxieties and disappointments and uncertainties that life throws our way. I think that's where this concept of nibbana comes in.
Okay, yeah, nibbana,
Right.
right? That state of ultimate peace, liberation that the Buddha talked about. But if it's not about being a saint and getting a one-way ticket to some heavenly realm,
Hmm.
then what is it exactly?
It's not really a reward that you receive, It's more like a state of being, something you realize. Nibbana is about transcending that cycle of suffering we've been talking about, breaking free from those patterns, the craving, the dissatisfaction, the things that keep us on that roller coaster.
So you're saying there's a way to actually step off the roller coaster. I mean,
Uh,
that sounds amazing,
right.
but kind of too good to be true.
Yeah, it's natural to be skeptical, right? But this is where the Buddhist path, what the Buddha himself outlined, comes in. He wasn't just like pointing at some distant possibility. He laid out a practical framework for how we can achieve liberation.
So like a step-by-step guide to Nibbana.
In a way, yeah, it involves understanding the Four Noble Truths, embracing the Eightfold Path, and gradually, chipping away at those mental fetters, those things that bind us to suffering. It's like, imagine a sculptor. They chip away at a block of marble to reveal this masterpiece within, right?
So it's more like a process of refining ourselves, uncovering that inherent peace that like maybe has always been there. It reminds me of that analogy, the one about the severed branch from chapter 35.
Perfect example. Just like that branch, once it's cut off, it doesn't receive nourishment from the tree anymore, right?
No.
It just decays. The person who has attained nibbana, they're free from that constant pull of craving and aversion. They exist in a state of liberation.
Okay, yeah. That's such a powerful image. It's not about running away from the world, but like transforming our relationship with it.
Right.
Becoming free from that inner turmoil that's always there. And here's what I find so interesting, if I'm understanding this right. This isn't something we have to wait for in some afterlife, right? It's accessible now.
Exactly. The Buddha's teachings emphasize that nibbana, this state of liberation, it's attainable in this life. It's a possibility, right here, right now, for anyone who's willing to actually embark on that journey.
That changes everything. It's not about waiting for some reward in the future or fearing some cosmic punishment. It's about actively shaping our experience right here and now. It's about the journey itself. As much as this idea of inner peace and liberation really speaks to me, I gotta be honest, something's been kind of nagging at me. Like we've been talking about karma, rebirth, reaching nibbana. It all seems, I don't know, very inward focused.
I see what you mean. It's like we're exploring this whole intricate inner landscape, but how does that actually translate into like the outer world,
Mm-hmm.
The world of relationships, responsibilities, disagreements, all that messy stuff.
Exactly. Does Buddhism say anything about how we should act out there, especially when things get complicated?
Absolutely. That's a huge part of it. It's not enough to just cultivate inner peace, right? Buddhism really emphasizes the importance of living a life guided by compassion and wisdom. And naturally, those principles extend to how we interact with everyone around us.
So it's not just about like retreating to a mountaintop and meditating. We have a responsibility to bring those insights into our everyday lives, how we treat our family, our friends, even strangers.
Exactly. And those excerpts you share, they touch on this beautifully. Remember in chapter 29 where the Buddha connects moral responsibility directly to rebirth? It's like, even without this permanent soul, our actions, they create those ripples, right? They affect not just us, but everyone around us.
It all comes back to those ripples, doesn't it? Like, even if Matt doesn't come back in a recognizable form, my actions still have this impact that continues.
Exactly. It's like that example of the mango thief, right? His actions don't exist in a vacuum. The act of stealing, it has consequences that go way beyond his individual experience. It impacts the owner, the community, even future access to mangoes for other people, right? It's all connected.
Which, now that you mention it, reminds me of that other part, the one about the different types of wives in chapter 12. I have to admit, not exactly what you'd expect in a text on philosophy.
Right, I know. It's kind of funny in a way. But while the language might seem a little outdated to us now, that section really dives into social roles and relationships. It highlights the importance of kindness, respect, responsibility, those essential qualities within a family and a community.
So it's not about rejecting the world or ignoring how complex it is. It's about being in the world, engaging with it, but in a way that embodies those core values: compassion, wisdom, ethical conduct.
I love how you put that. It's like, imagine as we cultivate inner peace and understanding within ourselves, it starts to ripple outward, right? It naturally influences how we treat others, how we approach situations, and hopefully it leads to a more harmonious and compassionate society.
I think that's something we can all agree the world needs a lot more of, don't you think? There's so much division, so much suffering. These principles, these teachings, they feel more relevant now than ever.
I completely agree.
Hmm.
Buddhist teachings offer this really powerful antidote to those very things. You know, they provide this framework for living a life that's not just about our own benefit, but the benefit of all beings.
Which brings us back to you, dear listener. So what does this mean for your deep dive into Buddhism?
It means recognizing that Buddhism isn't just some collection of abstract ideas or some ancient rituals. It's a living, breathing philosophy, a guide to navigating this crazy thing called life with wisdom, with compassion, and with a sense of responsibility.
And it all starts with that inward journey, right? Exploring those core concepts like impermanence, suffering, the ever-changing nature of the self.
And then as we start to internalize those truths, as we really get them deep down, it's like the world around us starts to shift too. Our
Hmm.
priorities change, our actions become more aligned with those values we've been talking about.
That's the real beauty of it. It's not about escaping from the world, but transforming ourselves, and in turn, transforming the world around us.
And it's even more amazing. This journey, it's open to absolutely everyone. It doesn't matter your background, your beliefs, everyone's welcome.
So to our listener, we encourage you, keep going, keep exploring those texts, keep digging into those teachings. Come to it with an open mind and that curious heart.
And remember, the path of Buddhism, it's not about being solitary. It's a shared journey. And the more each of us can embody those values, compassion, wisdom, ethical conduct, the closer we get to creating a world where there's less suffering and more peace for everyone.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to continue your exploration. May your journey be filled with insight, compassion, and a deep sense of peace.